Welcome once again to the Go for Ball podcast. I'm Big Italy 42. He's Scott Mailwig at Sports 25 to Life, and talking about your recent hot hitters, cold hitters, whatever you like. Going last 30 days now. So we'll start off again at catcher, where over the last 30 days, it is not Buster Posey who's the top catcher, as far as batting average at least. It's Francisco Cervelli, batting 375, 188 ISO, 2 homers, only 7 RBI, because he bats very low in that lineup that hasn't been particularly good, but 15 runs scored is good for every catcher not named Kyle Schwarber, who we'll get to in a second. But Cervelli is still one of those guys. I mean, bats 7th or 8th more often than not, so he's not a guy you're really interested in, but it's interesting to see that he has been hitting well, and I mean, he's fairly cheap, so if you're looking for just a filler against a bad pitcher, maybe he's the guy that sneaks onto your radar every once in a while now, because he is hitting pretty well.
Yeah, definitely. He's been pretty good against lefties, too. Moves up a spot in the order when they face lefties, so that's probably the best situation to use him in. Posey, like you mentioned, has been the most consistent guy still. He's hitting 337 with a 351 WOBA over the last month. 14 RBI, 11 runs scored. He's just been rock solid. It's still only striking out 8% of the time in that span. I mean, it's hard to ask for much more from that guy. One guy that was buoyed a bit by Coors in this time frame, Derek Norris, is up to 321 again over the last month. 2 home runs, 11 runs scored, 9 RBI. He's been pretty solid. Still hard to justify his price at times when he's not facing a lefty, even though he's hitting in the 2-hole for a catcher. His power's just been fairly non-existent at points lately, and it makes it really tough to use him.
Yeah, and he seems like one of those guys where after they get the price bump on FanDuel, where his price just kind of stays where it is for a couple weeks, and it's kind of still at that unplayable level. But I think once it drops back below 3K, he's a guy I'll be playing more. But like you said, right now he's pretty much just a GPP option at best. And then, of course, Kyle Schwarber. I mean, we could have mentioned him first, but you would have seen that coming. Over the past 30 days, 7 home runs, 24 runs scored, 21 RBIs, walking 16.5% of the time, 277 ISO. I mean, especially when this guy's playing at Wrigley Field, or really any field. I mean, he's just absolutely locked in. This guy's destroying the baseball right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's Wrigley Field always becomes a nice hitter's park in the summer, and I mean, he's taking full advantage of it. He's striking out a lot, and he doesn't have a great average, but a 388 on base percentage with a 396 WOBA. I don't care what his batting average is, even if it is 253. So, I mean, hitting a ton of home runs, 7 home runs in the last 30 days, 20 plus RBI runs scored. Really hard to argue that anyone else is the top catcher over this span. And I mean, I don't know if he's going anywhere. He's just been so rock solid. And we'll move down to two guys actually that have been really struggling. Jonathan Lucroy, 231 with a 291 WOBA. Over the last 30 days, he's played basically every game.
And great matchups, too.
Yeah, I mean, he's just been really struggling, much like most of the Brewers have. And then even further below that, Russell Martin, in that dominant Blue Jays lineup now, he's been okay in terms of 2 home runs, 10 runs scored, 7 RBI over this span, but only a 216 batting average, 283 WOBA. Struggling on balls in play. I think he comes back around. There's too many good hitters around him for his numbers not to be decent. But he's definitely overpriced right now, especially when the Blue Jays are in Rogers Center facing a lefty, stuff like that. I mean, his price jumps way up on a lot of sites.
Yeah, he seems like that one guy, though, that, like you said, his price on DraftKings especially getting really high, but it's been pretty low on FanDuel recently, where I've just kind of been playing him in my cash games because he's cheap. And he's been a letdown, but one of these days at 2,500, he's going to come back, hit a homer, have a big game, and it's going to pay off in a big way. So I'm with you. I tend to think that he's going to be fine this season as well. Moving on here to first base options, where there's not a whole lot of surprise, but obviously a lot of hitters hitting the ball very well. You got Joey Votto up here. Joey Votto and Eric Hosmer actually at the top as far as batting average. And these are two guys that you and I talk about a lot, and this is a perfect scenario of, guys that are hitting well that nobody ever seems to be on. I mean, Votto's price creeping up, but he's got a 514 WOBA in the last 30 days. 318 ISO, 6 homers. Eric Hosmer, similar numbers, slightly lower ISO and WOBA, but more RBIs and more runs scored. So take your pick with these two guys, but Joey Votto's walking 27% of the time right now. I mean, it's hard to say that any hitter in baseball is seeing the ball better than Joey Votto right now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's been incredible, and Hosmer's been right behind him with a 373 batting average, 459 WOBA. 265 ISO, 25 runs scored, 24 RBI. He's only walking 12% of the time, so his on base percentage is way below Votto, and he's still having a monster month. That just shows you how good Votto's been. Another guy that finally came around in the past month or so, Edwin Encarnacion, hitting 351 with a 443 WOBA. I mean, he's just been fantastic lately. Not the power that you want to see from him still, only 4 home runs. He's missed a few games with injury here and there, but it's nice to see him coming around on the batting average side of things after he was struggling for so long.
Yeah, and I mean, his price right now on DraftKings specifically is down pretty low, so
yeah,
can take advantage of that. I mean, like you said, he's not hitting for power, but he's one of those guys that's a streaky hitter, so once he gets it going, you certainly expect he's going to have himself a nice stretch there. And then, of course, we have to mention Chris Davis and his 15 home runs in the last 30 days, 36 RBI, 26 runs scored. I mean, still striking out a ton, but go ahead and just erase that number out of your memory because that doesn't matter at all. We're talking about Joey Votto's WOBA, 514. Chris Davis is walking 12.7% of the time, and he has a 513 WOBA. So
yeah, and a 490 ISO.
Yeah, which is just those are the type of numbers that if ISO existed in video games, that would be the numbers you're putting up with guys like Chris Davis in video games. I mean, it's not even real. It's insane.
Yeah, another guy that's been way up there lately that does this seemingly every second half now and is in cores this weekend. Lucas Duda has a 432 ISO over the past month with 9 home runs, 17 RBI. I mean, he's been massive. He just doesn't have the team around him that Chris Davis does. I mean, that Orioles lineup is just outstanding right now.
Yeah. I mean, Lucas Duda, like you said, absolutely locked in too. Another guy who's having a nice offensive month, but he's just so bad against left-handed pitchers that you really just got to avoid him in these situations. Brandon Belt, 8 homers, 22 RBI, 270 ISO, 270 batting average over the past month. But I feel like people, when you stack the Giants and when you're looking at bad pitchers, he gets thrown in there against lefties too much, but he's just awful against lefties. So not a guy that I consider at all. And then one of the more popular value plays at times recently against a righty has been Justin Bohr. But, I mean, this is the guy you're playing for power. And among all these qualified first basemen, he has the 3rd lowest ISO, barely ahead of James Loney and Joe Mauer. We know how much power these two guys have. In fact, Joe Mauer has 2 homers and James Loney has 1. Bohr only has 2 only over the past month. But 270 WOBA, I mean, he's been awful. I mean, he's the guy that does have power, but, I mean, he hasn't shown it over the past month. So I don't care that he's minimum salary some places. Not a guy that I'm playing.
Yeah, same here. Another guy stuck at the bottom right now, Albert Pujols, has been struggling over the past 30 days or so, but he still has 4 home runs, 10 RBI. Somehow he has 3 stolen bases over that span, too. I'm not really sure how that happened. But he's a guy, he's a guy that is going to come around again at some point. His price has been way down, too. He just hit back-to-back home runs in back-to-back days against the White Sox. So I think he's going to come back around, but he's been really struggling lately.
Yeah, absolutely. And then as we move over to second base, Ian Kinsler, and this is going to be even better moving forward now that Miguel Cabrera is back, batting .391 over the past month. 191 ISO is solid, 24 runs scored. Was batting 3rd there for a while, now obviously back in the 2-hole with Miggy back. But I expect him to, well, he's pricey, so you're not getting any value here, but I expect him to be a guy that, maybe actually worth that price tag sometimes now in the second half where he really wasn't in the first half. So you got to like him. And then number 2, enter your one of your favorite players, Ben Zobrist. So I'll let you talk about your boy Ben Zobrist.
Yeah, he's been red hot again, facing a lot of lefties too, which is always good for him.
Yeah.
Zobrist has 5 home runs, 15 runs scored, 14 RBI, hitting .360, the 454 WOBA. It's really hard to argue with him. It's unfortunate they moved him to the outfield on FanDuel, but you're still getting second base eligibility from him just about everywhere else. He's been an elite play there, only striking out 10% of the time, walking 14% of the time. The guys just look great and has been a ridiculously good acquisition for the Royals.
Yeah. Another guy with similar power numbers over that same span, but he's the guy that does not hit well from the right side of the plate. He's the guy that you played from the left side against righties. Neil Walker, 6 homers, 14 runs scored, 13 RBI. Another guy, similar numbers as far as strikeout rate to Zobrist, 10.5% strikeout rate, 274 ISO. So he's one of those guys that he's really cheap right now on both sides. So whenever he's facing a righty, he makes for a great cash game play. And he's even got some nice upside, as you can tell here, too. Yeah,
definitely. Couple guys that have been struggling a bit more lately. Brian Dozier's been ice cold, hitting .208 with a .291 WOBA. Got to think he comes back around. He's still got 5 home runs in this span, so the power is still there. His average hasn't been great all year, but he's been really struggling lately. And then Anthony Rendon, who I feel like I talk about every day because his price is so cheap every day, has just been ice cold too, hitting in the 2-hole most of the time for the Nationals, but has just 1 home run, 5 runs scored, and 2 RBI over the past month, which is just horrendous.
Yeah, he's been absolutely terrible. A guy who hasn't been terrible and is starting to creep up there, obviously in Coors Field now this weekend. Daniel Murphy, for the past 30 days, this is not a power hitter, but he's putting up some big time numbers. 214 ISO, 4 homers, 16 RBIs, 13 runs scored. So he's been a guy that's really been producing. And then D. Gordon, the past couple weeks, I mean, the full 30 days don't tell the whole story of what he's done over the past couple weeks. I believe it's, 8 out of his last 10 games, multi-hits. He's got 7 stolen bases in the last month. And he's only striking out 8.2% of the time, which is just insane for a guy that a few years ago with the Dodgers, I mean, he was like Billy Hamilton, speedster that could not make contact. But now all of a sudden, I mean, he's getting on base and producing. So still a weak lineup, especially without Giancarlo Stanton. But you got some guys like Derek Dietrich. They're starting to hit better. So definitely upping his value just a little bit too.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, moving on to shortstop. Another guy that we talk about, especially in GPPs recently, absolutely on fire over the past 30 days. As Drupal Cabrera, 410 batting average, 218 ISO, 3 homers, 18 runs scored. And it's another one of those guys that maybe people who are new to DFS or maybe didn't watch baseball before they played DFS, this is a guy who was a very good hitter a few years ago. This was an all-star player, and because of his slow start this year, a lot of people just kind of wrote him off. And he's got that middling kind of price tag now where you don't love playing him in cash games, but you'd be hard-pressed to find a guy that's been more consistent at shortstop over the past month.
Yeah, definitely. He's got a 200 WRC plus. No other shortstop is above about 150-ish in that span. He's just been incredible, and that's with only 3 home runs, too. 18 runs scored, 10 RBI. There's been a lot of solid hitting shortstops, but none of these guys are really displaying a ton of power. I mean, we've seen Francisco Lindor, Xander Bogaerts, even Hechavarria for the Marlins, all hitting above 300 for the last month, but none of them has more than 3 home runs. Lindor has 3. They're reaching that like 10 to 15 RBI runs scored range, not stealing a ton of bases. So, I mean, shortstop just remains a position that doesn't have a ton of upside, and Cabrera has given us that upside over the past month or so. Another guy who's been really hot, even more so over the last few days, Jimmy Rollins for the Dodgers, hitting 296 with a 367 WOBA. Over the past 30 days, 16 runs scored back at the top of the order, 4 home runs, 2 stolen bases. There's a lot to like there, and he's going to be a really strong option the rest of the way.
Yeah, he's one of those guys. I mean, you especially, you were driving the Jimmy Rollins value train for most of the season, and now he's finally producing at that level. So I'm with you. I'll be taking advantage of that discount as long as I can. A couple other guys, Carlos Correa just has a ton of power still, 260 WOBA, 7 homers, 5 stolen bases over the last 30 days. Most expensive option every single night, but when given the right matchup, especially against a bad lefty, he's worth it more often than not. And other guy that's up there as the most expensive option on the night, Troy Tulowitzki, and he has been actually the worst qualified shortstop over the past 30 days. Well, not by WRC plus standards, but as far as batting average, he's got a 180 batting average, 135 ISO. He does have 3 homers and 16 runs scored, but I mean, you got to get on base if you're going to be leading off for this lineup with the Blue Jays. And I mean, if he could just find a way to get on base and hit the ball consistently, he's going to score a ton of runs at the top of that order. And I mean, even the bottom of the order producing well, so he should have RBI opportunities, but definitely a guy that's been a huge disappointment recently.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, moving on here to the hot corner, third base, which seems to be littered with good options most nights now. Of course, the guy that bats right behind Troy Tulowitzki, Josh Donaldson, 398 ISO over the past month, 11 home runs. He's no Chris Davis in the power department over the past month, but he's damn close, though. 28 RBIs, 22 runs scored. I mean, he's just the elite option pretty much every single night. But he's priced so highly that, I mean, he's only a GPP option really at this point. Outside of those small slates where, you know, you get the Blue Jays in a good spot and only cheap pitching, but definitely a guy you want to get exposure to most nights. And then a guy who has similar power numbers to him, shockingly, over the past month, Matt Carpenter, 9 homers, 18 RBIs, at 350 ISO over the past month. certainly never in his life going to maintain those numbers. But I mean, he's been a really hot hitter recently. Well, maybe not so much over the past week, but over the past month, I mean, crushing the ball.
Yeah, a guy that was struggling all season has been much better lately, along with the rest of the Rays, especially against lefties. Evan Longoria is up to a 147 WRC plus, hitting 321, 4 home runs, 14 RBI. He's been really solid. It's nice to see him back playing well. There's not a ton to say there because, I mean, the Rays offense just still isn't good outside of games against lefties. That's where you want to target Longoria, and his price has bumped back up. Speaking of a couple guys who have not been hot lately, Todd Frazier for the Reds has been just absolutely ice cold. 47 WRC plus, 185 batting average, still has 3 home runs and 12 RBI over that span, but he just has been really struggling, even against lefties, and he's got like ridiculous numbers against lefties and at home. So hopefully we'll see him turn it around pretty soon. A value play that I was playing quite a bit for a while, Tyler Saladino has moved all the way down from the 2-hole to the 9-hole for the White Sox. He's hitting just 212 over the last month. 5 stolen bases still. He's got the speed upside, 18 runs scored. So there's definitely some potential there if he can get the bat going and get on base. He's having a lot of the same trouble that you were just talking about with Tulowitzki. I mean, he's in a pretty decent situation. He's got the tools to succeed, and he's just not getting it done right now. It'll be nice to see his price go back down. Hopefully he can get back towards the top of that order and generate some more runs.
Yeah, absolutely. And another guy who bats now near the heart of the order behind some huge bats for the Tigers, Nick Castellanos. He's got 6 homers. He has 21 RBI on the month, but take that with a grain of salt because what was it he had the other day? 6, I think, in that one game. Had 2 doubles, 2 homers. So, I mean, these numbers are slightly skewed, but a 276 ISO, I mean, this is a guy who has shown some power, especially against left-handed pitching, where flies under the radar because, like we said, there's always a ton of options at third base, but, you know, he's one of those guys that you can kind of slot in there for cheap, and you know he's going to be batting a couple spots behind guys like Miguel Cabrera, Victor Martinez, JD Martinez, so should be lots of guys on for him moving forward as well.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, moving on here to the outfield, looking at all these options, and there's not a whole lot of surprises up at the top, but one guy we're going to mention right off the bat, who we kind of waited around all year for him to get it going, Michael Brantley, batting 400 over the past month with a 221 ISO. 3 homers, 15 RBIs, 15 runs scored, and 4 stolen bases, all pretty good numbers, but he's just been an elite cash game play, starting to get priced like an elite power hitter, though, which is troublesome because he hasn't had a lot of power.
And he hasn't had a lot of help from his teammates either. It's nice he's finally getting Kipnis back, but, I mean, when you're hitting 400 in a month and only have 15 runs and 15 RBI,
that's a problem.
Yeah, it's definitely a problem.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the Indians... Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, it seems like the Indians, they score 12 runs in one game, and then they score 2 in each of the next 4, and then they score 12 runs again. So it's been, you know, they'll have those big games, but, I mean, it's not consistent.
Yeah, I mean, you compare those numbers from Brantley hitting 400 with a 454 WOBA to Carlos Gonzalez, who's hitting 300, and he's got 15 home runs, 33 RBI, 25 runs scored. I mean, he's obviously playing in cores, which is nice for him, but I mean, that's just how massive a difference there is on 2 guys that are priced the same. I mean, Gonzalez has twice as many RBI, almost twice as many runs scored, 5 times as many home runs. I mean, it's just a massive difference, and you're paying that price for Brantley right now, which is unfortunate. A couple other guys that have been hot, Carlos Beltran with a 173 WRC plus, 6 home runs. He's done a great job filling in for Teixeira for them. Only a 298 batting average, but I mean that's well above where he was on the season prior to this, so got to feel pretty good about him.
Yeah, and then a couple of Diamondbacks guys up here at the top.
Yep.
AJ Pollock, he's only got 1 home run, but 22 runs scored, 10 stolen bases. Walking and striking out, both 9% clip. He's got a 415 WOBA, and then right above him, David Peralta, 21 RBIs. You notice he bats behind Pollock and Goldschmidt. And he's got a 195 ISO. I mean, he's batting 378 over the past month. And these are, you know, this was the Diamondbacks offense that a lot of people were picking on this past week. But if you were stacking these Diamondbacks against some of these pitchers, you were probably making some nice cheddar there. And I know that it's not always going to pan out that way, but one of those teams that doesn't have overall great numbers, but they have so many good individual hitters that, you know, you like to target them.
Yeah.
Another guy that's been hot, Nelson Cruz. We don't need to tell you his numbers; they're ridiculous. He's just been killing the ball pretty much every night. And then as you're looking down towards some cheaper guys that are kind of all around good plays, Adam Eaton's been very consistent, especially against righties. But with that stretch that he and Melky Cabrera went through, He's just so highly priced everywhere. I mean, over 4K. I just can't bring myself to pay that type of price for a guy that's just a cash game play with little upside.
Yeah, definitely. Moving down towards the bottom here, one guy that I keep seeing in Blue Jays stacks, especially when they face lefties, is Kevin Pillar. People keep putting him in there because he's like kind of cheap, but he's not really cheap. I mean, he's just been awful over the last month. I think he's got a 19 WRC plus, 182 batting average, 0 home runs, 0 stolen bases, and 3 RBI. I mean, he's not playing quite every day, but he's playing close enough to every day that those numbers are just absolutely atrocious. Yeah. And he's the guy that is probably the guy you should be leaving out of your Blue Jays stacks and getting guys like a really cheap Cliff Pennington when he's in the lineup and stuff like that, instead of just playing Pillar because he's the 6 hitter with a pretty cheap price tag. I mean, I think you can do better at different positions with how much upside there is in the outfield. Jay Bruce, another guy that is in kind of that same situation. I stack Reds sometimes against weak righties, and I mean, he's been just awful again over the last month. I know he's been dealing with a bunch of injuries all year, but it's so hard to play him right now. 47 WRC plus, 186 batting average. He does have 17 RBI because he's hitting after Votto, and I mean, Frazier hasn't been great either, but he's hitting after the middle of their order. He does have 3 home runs, so there's still some power there. I prefer him greatly to Pillar, and they've been priced the same a lot on DraftKings lately. Yeah. But both of them are just struggling a ton.
Yeah, and your worst qualified hitter, another guy with some power, actually pretty similar numbers to Jay Bruce in that regard. 179 ISO, 3 homers also, but only 7 RBIs. Been down in the 8 and 9 hole a lot. Jock Peterson.
Yep.
He was the flavor of the week there for a while, and while the kid still does have power, I mean, he's the guy that I leave out of my Dodgers stacks because I mean, the bottom of that order is not good, and you're chasing his early season success at this point, and Definitely. That's not something I'll be doing. One more guy to mention is really struggling, Carlos Gomez, the other Cargo, the one that doesn't deserve the nickname apparently. Since his trade, I mean, he's just been god awful, batting less than 200. Does have 5 stolen bases, but when your WOBA is 216, you're pretty much having to steal a base every time you get on because it's not that often.
Yeah, it's rough.
Yeah, so either way, thanks for hanging out with us. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Check out all of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.